There's a critical issue that continues to cost companies millions. It's the struggle to cut through noise and truly connect with buyers. I was doing a bit of research and found that 75% of B2B buyers now use social media to research vendors. Yet, a staggering 80% of sales reps still aren't leveraging social selling effectively. This disconnect, in my opinion, is in effect leaving money on the table and opportunities untapped. So we'll be exploring how to address this gap with the CEO of LetterDrop, a SaaS platform that enables B2B companies to better build trust and engage with potential buyers through social selling, public customer education, and personal branding in what is now very much a digital first landscape. But first, hello, welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast, where we tackle challenges around revenue growth that keep B2B leaders up at night. I'm Vinay Koshi, and our guest is Parthi Loganathan. Parthi, you, of course, are the CEO of LetterDrop. I believe you're a Y Combinator-backed startup based in France. LetterDrop, of course, helps companies build content engines to generate pipelines. This software platform, as I understand it, really gives marketing teams at over 100 companies like Ramp, Synthesia, and the likes tools to understand what content is actually driving revenue, create and distribute more of it to in-market buyers. Would that be a fair description of LetterDrop?
Yeah, absolutely. What we're really trying to do is help companies authentically connect with
Mm.
their prospects. To the stat you mentioned earlier, more and more buyers are trying to learn more about what they should purchase, what problems they are worth solving from their peers, from people who are showing up online. And so the people aspect of the buyer education is starting to become increasingly
Mm.
important. And so customer education is no longer just nameless white papers or long newsletters without a name attached to it, but it's actually a person that you trust, much like yourself. People are listening to this podcast. They trust Vinay to bring in the best people to educate them about how they should be thinking about go to market. I think that's how it's evolving in terms of how people purchase. And your employees, your sales reps, your marketing team, your executives are really the folks at the forefront of actually being the face of the company and selling and talking about what it is you do. And so I think that is the disconnect that we're seeing today. And savvy companies are really getting ahead of that and trying to figure out how do we actually get a person to build trust at our company, not just the
And
brand.
now, I believe you were previously a product manager on the Google search team. You then went through running a bunch of micro SaaS companies before, of course, starting Letter Drop. I'm curious, was there a particular incident or event that brought home to you the realization of the problem that Letter Drop is addressing? And if so, could you tell us more about it?
Yeah, I can tell you about how we got here. So, like you mentioned, I used to be a product manager on the search team at Google. Letterdrop was initially conceived with as a way to really help companies, B2B companies specifically, figure out how to approach SEO in a customer centric
Mhm.
manner. And one of the things that we really realized was SEO is no longer just sort of word vomit on multiple pages from nameless people. It's really about showcasing experiences from people who've been there, done that. And that's something that Google's been prioritizing. And I realized, hey, like this actually matters across channels. For B2B companies, LinkedIn is the primary sort of like social channel and one that's been growing very rapidly over the past couple of years. And when we started selling to the marketing teams, which were thinking about SEO and also as about social, we just realized these people keep on posting to the company page. They keep publishing nameless blogs. And I just realized that this wasn't resonating. This wasn't being seen, partially because they were not getting people involved.
Mhm.
And they had these large teams, their sales reps talking to folks every single day. They had their customer success reps talking to people every single day, but none of these people were actually sharing that content or were thinking about educating publicly. And so then we saw this kind of gap. And what we're trying to do right now is make it very simple for those sales reps, for those execs, for those CSMs, anybody who's customer facing, to actually start being a vessel for that customer education to customers, to prospects, so that they can build that trust, educate them, so that they start coming to them.
Given your journey to date, I'm curious, what would you say would be your personal area of strength?
I'm really approaching. So I, as a founder, my background is in product management and
Mhm.
engineering, and I now work in go-to-market tech, and we sell to heads of sales, heads of marketing, and I went from basically no followers in the space, no connections in the space, to well over 10,000 followers on LinkedIn, most of which are in our ICP. So these are marketers, sales folks, etc. And that accounts for about 64% of our inbound pipeline right now.
Hmm.
And it is an incredibly powerful channel that I think is completely untapped by the vast majority of companies. They're still running playbooks from 10 years ago and not realizing that a people first approach to go to market, where the people who are reaching out to book meetings or the people that your buyers are connecting with are should be actually actively talking about your product, marketing it, talking about the customer problems that they might be facing, and that's going to help them build trust. And it's really not that much work to do. I think a lot of people are scared of showing up online, but quite frankly, and my own team has told me this, it makes a world of difference in terms of your ability to generate pipeline, your ability to get more responses and replies, book more meetings, and get ghosted less. And so there's really no downside to doing it, and you can really truly, especially with software and AI today, bring down the time taken to create useful, thoughtful content to a couple of minutes per week.
So, if I'm hearing you correctly, are you suggesting that most people, while they may have a presence online, especially on social media platforms, and aren't necessarily effectively leveraging their presence in order to drive sales? So, would that be a good way to put it?
Yes, that's about right. I think I myself am a case study in
Mhm.
this in terms of how pretty much anybody can build a presence online and use that to drive net new business.
So while people understand what product they're trying to sell, how would you suggest they develop some sort of framework in which to be able to leverage a platform? We're talking about B2B here, so let's say LinkedIn, in order to be more relevant and visible to their ICP.
Absolutely. And so, just to be clear, it's going to vary from
Mhm.
platform to platform. The platform I'm most familiar with is LinkedIn, just because we operate in the B2B space. LinkedIn's also great because, unlike a lot of the other platforms, it is incredibly data rich. You're able to actually see people's job titles, their relationships within an organization, their seniority, location, company size, all that kind of very rich firmographic information that's absent on these more maybe truly consumer minded platforms like a Twitter, for example. And with LinkedIn, I think the second thing to note is that it's also a channel, it's an outbound channel for you. So if you talk to any sales rep, they are doing outbound via cold calling, via cold emailing, and LinkedIn DMing is one of the three that every single sales rep is using today. And guess what? Your big blocker there is getting people to want to connect with
Mhm.
you. I think we're all pretty familiar with a somebody connecting with us on LinkedIn, and then immediately after accepting that request, you're met with a
Mhm.
pitch immediately trying to get time with you, trying to sell you something, and it doesn't feel good, right? And what we're trying to help companies do is figure out, okay, how do you actually add value before you ask for something? How do you earn the right to a meeting, essentially? And in terms of being successful on LinkedIn, it's a just connecting with everybody who's a prospective buyer. You have 100 LinkedIn connection requests per week. If you are in a customer facing role and you are not using all 100 of those, that is just a missed opportunity. I'm going to tell you right now. The second thing is actually letting people know what you are about and what you're trying to do. So, actively talking about the problems that you're solving through your product or service is pretty important. And I think a lot of people do this in a way that is very self congratulatory or inward
Mhm.
focused. And instead, they really need to think about it from the audience's perspective. Yes, you should showcase product demos and talk about all that stuff. But what would be better is if you actually just talked about problems that your customers are facing, that other customers who might look like them might be facing as
Mhm.
well. How to solve those problems, how to solve those problems without your software, with your software, how to like customer stories, like actually interview your customers and showcase their successes. I think these are all the kinds of things that you want to start doing on LinkedIn so that the people who look like your current customers will automatically start connecting with you, following you, wanting to reply to you when you reach out. And they will also give you those kind of passive signals when they're open to a conversation. So I think that's the right way to get started on LinkedIn, especially if you're in B2B sales and marketing.
All of that certainly makes sense. The issue, at least in my experience, is that for some people, it's almost like facing writer's block when you want to post on a platform like LinkedIn. Yeah, you've touched upon the fact that they could certainly mention or talk about conversations that they're having offline, be it on a phone call or perhaps a Zoom meeting, etc. How would you go from keeping that context in mind to actually putting it in a form that is acceptable for a platform, in this case, LinkedIn?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. A lot of people have writer's block. And so it's work, especially if you haven't done it before. You're thinking to yourself, okay, what should I write about? You're perhaps shy. You're wondering, what are people going to think of me? Do I have anything intelligent to
Mhm.
say? And honestly, that gets the best of us. And what ends up happening is you have this analysis paralysis, and then the end result of that is inaction. You just end up not posting something. But in reality, a lot of the most valuable pieces of content that I've created that has driven like a real business for us, I've banged out in 5 minutes or less.
Mhm.
And the real thinking or the real thought process behind something that's interesting to say actually comes not from when you're writing, but from your life experiences. And as you go about your day, as you're talking to customers, as you're talking to your team, as you're talking to partners, you're picking up on all this useful information. You're starting to understand, hey, what are the top problems our customers are facing? Every time I get on a sales call, every time I get on a discovery call, what are the questions which people keep asking me? Did someone ask me a net new question today, which I had to think about? You can be sure as hell if one person's asking you that, there's probably 100 people who look
Mhm.
exactly like them who are thinking the exact same thing. And you probably answer that question, or you after the call you went and researched it, asked around, and found an answer and try to help them. Now think about how you can scalably answer that question, not just one to one, but one to many. That is the kernel of a really great content idea that's going to attract net new customers to you. And so you can do this manually, or you can use software like us, where we sit in on your Gong or Chorus calls and pull out those kinds of customer questions and turn that into thought leadership for you. I think the other great source of information is just internal calls. In your internal strategy calls, how are you talking about the future of your space? How are you talking about your customer problems internally? Our BDR tells me that a third of his content ideas, and he posts pretty regularly, come from just our one on one conversations.
Mhm.
He learns something from me and he goes and shares it with the world. If he learns something from me, he's fairly certain that other people could learn as well. And then the other thing I'd say that's easy is if your marketing team is already creating a whole bunch of assets on social, just reuse it. Don't just repost it. I think that's proven to be like fairly
Mhm.
ineffective. But think about how do you add your own commentary on it. Perhaps they launched a podcast interview or a webinar or an ebook or a blog post or something along those lines. Can you add a little bit of your own commentary on top of that and publish that and share that more broadly? So these are all great ideas in terms of helping you essentially just take customer questions or take things which are educational and put that out in public. And I think beyond that, a small percentage of your content should be more sales centric. Everything I mentioned is very educational. It's
Mhm.
fine to add some sales centric stuff in there. If you want to talk about how you're going to show up at a conference and you want to meet people, or if you guys have a new product launch and you want to showcase a demo, that's totally okay. And I think that those are actually important because what you're doing is the helpful content, the educational content attracts and brings in the right people where you're providing value. And then it's the product content or the demos or the sort of like bottom of funnel stuff that kind of hooks them in, and they're like, oh, you know what, that's actually really cool. That could be, it's very timely. I've been following this person for a while, and now they showed me something that actually could be useful. I should book a demo, or at the very least, I'm receptive to some outbound from them.
Mhm. So underlying all of this, I would assume, is a culture that is enabling and encouraging of this type of thinking and this level of content development. Could you speak to that? Because I'm not sure all companies give people carte blanche, so to speak, in terms of you guys can go out there and post all about our brand and what's related to our brand, no holds barred, as opposed to having very tight controls, perhaps via marketing or a brand manager, etc., who needs to vet things before permission is given to publish. How does it work for Let It Drop, and how are you seeing successful companies create the kind of culture that allows for what you've been describing?
Yeah, I think the kind of culture where you're trying to police the words of your employees is just simply not
Mhm.
scalable. It also too narrowly limits what you're able to do. Honestly, a lot of stuff has to come through experimentation. For example, our AE posted something, didn't ask me, just did it, and we got 4 inbound demos within the hour after he posted. And those things don't happen through like layers of approvals and managing brand voice. They happen through people thinking, oh, that's a good idea, or here's something I want to share with the world, and you see what happens. And I completely empathize and understand that a larger company might have cultural struggles around change management with these kinds of things. And in many cases, those much larger companies are hiding behind a very established brand. And so maybe they don't have to try as hard. Like everybody already knows about them. HubSpot, for example, and for what it's worth, they do a phenomenal job at content, but they don't really need to try as much. If someone says HubSpot to you, yeah, I know what
Mhm.
HubSpot is. It's more so like doing HubSpot now or HubSpot versus Salesforce. And so I think if you are not one of those massive companies, in which case I still think this would help. If you're a smaller company, don't police your employees quite as much. Let them run with it, and you'd be surprised by what happens. I think what might be better to answer is what is the inverse of this? Like, how do I get my employees to want to do this?
Mhm.
How do I get my sales reps to understand the value of doing this? And for them, they need to see that aha moment where they generated a net new lead,
Mhm.
or they built more pipeline, or they started to see their reply rate to their outbound pick up quite dramatically. And once you see that, you can't go back. You're just like, why was I playing on hard mode? People start trusting me now. People are coming to me. It's an inverse situation. I'm not begging people to get time on their calendar. And so I think they have to get past that initial crawl, walk, run phase and get to that aha moment to truly realize, hey, this is an unfair advantage. This is like incredibly scalable. This is a high leverage activity, which doesn't take me a lot of time for me to actually book meetings and connect with customers. I think the other thing to note about policing the brand voice is you have no idea how much damage you as a company are doing already in terms of one-on-one email outreach or DMs or cold calling. I get so many terrible emails from SDRs and BDRs every single day. I think on LinkedIn, I just posted, I screenshotted and I scrubbed any private information of somebody who just sent me truly one of the worst prospecting emails I've ever seen. I think very fairly poorly of this brand right now, and I don't know if I'm like very primed to purchase from them. And so think about it. Your company's already doing a really bad job, probably in terms of policing brand voice. And so I would just question, like, why do you have all of these rules and restrictions? Instead, just focus on like letting employees be creative, figure out strategies for them to stand out so that they can book meetings instead of trying to essentially make them all worker drones. In which case, like AI can do that for you today. Like
Mhm.
you don't need to be hiring employees to be doing that. And also, if everyone has their AI SDR to do the same thing, nobody has a competitive advantage. So we're all stuck in the exact same situation where we started out.
So, with this, assuming we've got the culture piece, we're encouraging our sales teams to proactively, and perhaps customer success and what have you, to proactively use platforms like LinkedIn. It could certainly drive leads. From a marketing's point of view, does there need to be a sync between what people are putting out from their own perspective versus things that they're working on, such as SEO, for example, which could perhaps create a bit of a compounding effect in terms of driving leads and increase through?
Yeah, I think this gets more complicated as you have more product lines. I think if you have multiple product lines, then you start talking about different types of
Mhm.
problems. And so it might not feel quite as unified, and different people are seeing a sort of like different flavor of your business. That said, we already do this today, right? So if you are a multi product company, you already probably split up your reps based on product. A whole set of SDRs and AEs are working on selling this
Mhm.
product and product A, and another set is working on selling product B, and marketing is maybe split between both of them, creating the assets and webinars and running ads for both of those. And so I think it really comes down to, since we're mostly talking about sales and sellers and they're focused on a single product line, they should just focus on whatever it is they're selling. They're trying to build a personal brand. They're trying to build problem awareness around whatever it is that they are selling, so that they can book those meetings and they can progress those deals forward. And then for everybody else, if you're like the executive or you're the marketing team and you're doing the same stuff around social selling, just pick one for any given time frame. Don't try to dilute your
Mhm.
message by going too broad. I speak from personal experience. Like I mentioned, like we work across a couple of different product lines, and I could talk about SEO and I could talk about social selling on alternate days, but that's a lot less effective than me going all in on what it is we are focused on right now, even if we do sell and support like different types of products.
With something like what we're doing at the moment, a podcast interview, would it make sense, therefore, for someone like yourself to perhaps share this kind of content to your teams, for them to listen into or take snippets from, and then add their own perspective in order to not just amplify your visibility, but also to add perspective that makes sense from a product use or, I guess, a specific pain point or use case?
Yeah, I think that fits squarely in the use case I mentioned earlier, where I said, hey, marketing's already probably creating a whole bunch of assets for you. And today it in some ways is wasted because it's just published on the company page. I don't know about you. I don't follow a whole bunch of companies. I largely follow people. I'm trying to learn from people. And so I think it's incredibly valuable for individuals, for sellers, for VPs, for your founders to also share those out there. And so let's take a podcast, for example. We host our own podcast and we go talk to many marketing and sales leaders. And our playbook there is we find people who talk about ideas that are very much aligned with what we believe as a
Mhm.
company. And instead of us just parroting and talking about the same thing over and over again, it's social proof and it's very validating to have a third party talk about the exact same idea and talk about why it's important, how they've maybe been doing things manually, but still it's been very successful for them. And so we've done interviews with like sales leaders like Laura from Dream Data, who's driven over $1 million in pipeline in the past 12 months from social selling, or Oliver Johnson, who's a BDR. Doesn't even have to be a high level
Mhm.
person, just somebody who resonates with what you want to say. He talks about how his reply rate jumped from like 10 to well over 50% after he started showing up online. And so those are really valuable snippets that we not only post to social, but I actually use in our outbound sequences. If I'm reaching out to a VP of sales, I say, hey, here's another VP of sales just like you, and here's what she
Mhm.
saw. It's not me telling you this, it's somebody else telling you this about her own results. You should think about it. And yeah, I think every sales person, every founder, every executive should be taking these kinds of assets that are coming from marketing or create them yourself.
Mhm.
No one's stopping you from doing an interview with a customer and putting it up there. Don't feel stifled by your marketing team, and share it broadly and get more people to share it, because it's only going to help you as a business in terms of getting awareness. In the same way that people say in sales, activity matters, like always be closing. Like, how many cold calls did you make today? How many emails did you send today? Every day you are not showing up, you're not publicly showing up and talking about your problem is a day where you are losing impressions. It's a day where you are not getting in front of potential customers. So think about that opportunity cost.
Some advice there. Underlying all of this is, of course, the premise that we really need to understand our customers very well. And I'm curious, most people would be able to identify some surface level issues or questions that customers may put to various teams. How do we go deeper? What is your recommendation on going deeper in order to really understand quite clearly a particular customer's use case and issues?
The best person to tell you about that is your
Mhm.
customers. There's no beating around the bush there. And so I would really rely on people who are on your front lines. Pre working with you, it's definitely your sales team, whoever is doing discovery calls, learning about your customer's business, and then trying to map what it is you do to their problems is like those conversations are probably gold over there. So if you're using software like Gong or Chorus or Fireflies, what have you, to record your sales calls, I think that is a really great source of information. Same thing, post sales,
Mhm.
customer success, ongoing customers, just try to listen in on those kinds of conversations and you'll find gold. What we do with our software actually is we mass process all of those calls and we pull out those little gold
Mhm.
nuggets and sort them by their value. So, okay, you have 17 customers asking this question or a variant of it, and it's worth, I don't know, $300,000 in terms of active contracts. So I don't know, it's something that a lot of people bring up and seems valuable. Maybe you should think about talking about that a little bit more. And I would say customer conversations beyond that, if you have any sort of customer support, Zendesk, Slack, just look at the types of things people are asking in there. And then beyond that, I would, if you're trying to create these kinds of assets, if you're trying to talk publicly and you're not in a position to, or you haven't talked to your customers, go out of your way to go talk to them.
Mhm.
So I notice a lot of marketers don't do this. Sales and CS, they talk to customers all the time, so they're great. A lot of marketers have never talked to an actual customer before, which is completely mind boggling to
Mhm.
me. And so they're spending all this money in terms of campaigns without a really good understanding of, hey, who it is we're trying to put out this messaging for. And regardless of your role, just go talk to actual customers and they will tell you what matters to them. And being able to ask the right questions, being able to dig a little bit deeper beyond surface level questions and ask why a couple of times to understand what are your underlying concerns, fears, what keeps you up at night. Those are the kinds of questions where you want to ask so that you truly understand what makes them tick, what drives them, which can then influence the type of content, type of messaging, type of outbound you do, because you can speak directly to the core of the issue as opposed to waving your hands and all over the place.
Could you give us an example of how this works? And I'm just thinking of people who work perhaps in a bit of a red ocean space. And I'm thinking of, say, salespeople in the airline industry going after corporate customers, or people in the telecommunications firms. You've got a lot of players. They're all doing the same sort of thing. How do you stand out on social media or build a bit of a brand, given the challenges there?
I You can have a pure brand play. It's possible, especially if your competition has zero brand whatsoever.
Mhm.
You can definitely do that. That said, I think brand is a byproduct of your offering. And so you do need some sort of slightly differentiated. Actually, every business needs, for their long term success, needs a differentiated
Mhm.
offering in order to survive and thrive. And so, even if you work in a commodity space where everything is the same, you're still competing on something, like either pricing tiers, or like in the airline industry it's like availability, like destinations, cities, airports supported pricing, ability to do corporate discounts. There's something that you can do that others can't. I'm thinking about like Mint Mobile, like telephone lines are completely commercialized. Ryan Reynolds, the actor, owns a majority share in Mint Mobile, and then they just have like amazing ads which just say, okay, look, we're just like cheaper than everybody else. And we don't have a lot of fancy campaigns or anything along those lines, but we're passing on those cost savings to you, the customer. And so I think If you're in a commoditized space, really try to figure out, okay, like why, like what it is that makes us sell, or like why do we win new business over the competition, and lean into that. That is going to be your messaging.
Mm.
And if you do not have an answer to that, I do think you have a bigger business problem that is not going to be solved by sales or marketing, but needs to be solved by your leadership team,
Mhm.
at a much more like meta level.
Brilliant. Thanks for sharing that. Much of what you're talking about is very much a customer centric type approach. But I'm curious, how does that differ when applied to demand generation compared to demand capture?
Absolutely. Both demand generation and demand capture both work in harmony. Demand capture, let's just define these first off. Demand capture is when there's already an existing market or people today who are ready to purchase, and all you're trying to do is get in front of them. That's all you're trying to do. In B2B, typically, like a small single digit percentage of your market at any point in time is maybe thinking about change, maybe is prioritizing the projects which are amenable to your solution coming in. And if you try to contact them when they're not in that frame of mind, good luck. They'll be like, yeah, reach out to us again in Q3, is the response you're going to get, if at all you're able to talk to them. And so demand capture is really about, okay, how do we get in front of those people? And so from a sales perspective, I can talk about this from an inbound and outbound perspective. From an outbound perspective, sales and your SDRs and your BDR team are exclusively focused on capturing that existing demand. They're going after small percentage of people who are actively in market, and they're trying to book meetings right now, like tomorrow, day after tomorrow, next week, so that they can maybe close a deal in whatever, a couple of months, whatever your sales cycle looks like. They are actively not supposed to, or not really thinking about, okay, people who are ready to buy 2 months, like 2 quarters from now, it's probably not a good use of your time to have a SDR reaching out to them and nurturing them that way. It's a just very expensive marketing channel, essentially, to do one-on-one email for somebody who's not in market. Demand generation, on the other hand, is getting people to want to buy your product, to be even aware that this problem exists, that they should be solving it, that they have these options to solve it, that whatever they're doing today, whether that be spreadsheets or inaction, what an alternative solution, there's something else that they can be doing, and that you are one of the options, and you're a differentiated and a better option for them. And so they may not be ready to buy today,
Mm.
but they will be in a couple of months from now. And you want to be the first person that they think of when that problem, that project that they wanted to unblock becomes a priority. There was this really great case study, or this study from Winter, where they discovered that among CMOs, whenever they had a problem, they already had their top vendor in mind. They would
Mm.
only evaluate 3 vendors. And after they picked their first 1 or 2 vendors, whom they may have already heard of from social media, from friends, from display ads, they do a little bit of searching, some, okay, what's the alternative to this product? And they'll find a set of 3, and then that's pretty much it.
Mm.
Nobody has the time to go through a massive RFP procurement process with 20 vendors unless you're truly in like the Fortune 100 enterprise type space, or maybe in government. And so you have to be one of those 3 is essentially the TLDR. And so that's where demand generation comes in. And so I think where social selling fits into this is you're doing the demand generation so that people will come to you individually as a rep, not just trust your brand, but trust you as an individual. It's not, hey, I should go to Letter Drop. It's also, I should talk to Parthi because he knows what he's talking
Mm.
about. Just very different from, I should go to Letter Drop because it has a product that solves my problem, versus I should go to Parthi and he will give me advice on how to solve this problem. It's a much more lucrative. It's something that I'd rather do, go to somebody for advice, as opposed to just be like, oh, this is the one product I want to buy. And so every sales rep can actually be that person if they try hard
Mm.
enough, but they don't. And then finally, on the demand capture side, I think as a sales rep, when you're putting all this stuff out there, it just makes it easier for you to actually go after the person who's in market, because you start getting signals in terms of who's in market. You start posting about this, people start viewing your profile, liking your posts. That's telling you, hey, these people care about what I'm talking about. They might be thinking about this problem. I should reach out to
Mhm.
them. So that's the one way in which social selling helps you identify who's in market. And the second is it just improves your reply rate. Like I'm more likely to respond to somebody who's publicly talking about a problem that I'm thinking of actively, as opposed to somebody who just cold emails me. I don't recognize their name. I do not associate their name with the problem. They're buried amongst 80 other emails in my inbox.
You're essentially suggesting that we really focus on developing in-house expertise, experience, and capabilities. Is there a point at which we should look for third parties to come in and help out either with leveling up our own experiences and capabilities, or certainly outsourcing bits of our branding and marketing?
So every company should ask itself this, like, what can you outsource and what can you not outsource? I think that's a very
Mhm.
important question. A lot of businesses aren't able to make that distinction properly, and then they end up outsourcing things that they really shouldn't. If you can't solve the problem, you can sure as hell bet that a third party can't solve the problem for you as well. What third parties are very good at are essentially bringing in tactics or bringing in expertise around a channel or expertise around how to do something. What they can't solve for you is understanding your customer and knowing your business. That has to be built in house. And so when it comes to this kind of activity, I think the most common thing that people are thinking about is maybe something around the lines of influencer marketing. How do we just pay somebody who already has this trust with an audience we want to sell to talk about
Mhm.
us? And the challenge there is A, it's pay to play, so it's fairly expensive. And B, they're not you. They can only talk about you to a certain degree. They have to worry about their own brand, their own audience, the trust that they have with their audience. They can't just be product shillers because that's going to erode trust with their audience. They can work with your competition.
Mhm.
One day they can talk about how great you are. The next day they can talk about how great your competitors are. And so it's a very brittle strategy, essentially. I think it's really great if you want quick results. If you're just like, okay, we don't have the time to build out this sort of internal capacity over 6 months. How do I just get results today? Go pay somebody who has that audience. That's great. But you still have to bring the subject matter expertise. They can just be a voice for you, but you have to have something that you want to talk about. I think the long term strategy is to build this capacity in house. It's much more sustainable. It's what's closer to your product. It's more bottom of funnel. It's what's going to actually get you results beyond just reach.
Mhm.
It's what's going to build trust. It's what's going to book meetings. I think the influencer, what they're really solving for is just reach. And then they're not solving for the other problems that you might have there. In terms of do I hire an agency to come in and do this for me? Once again, what they can help you do is maybe try to ideate with you, set up the accountability structures, all that kind of stuff to help you internally. But you do need the subject matter expertise. You do need to know who your customer is, why they buy from you, what their alternatives are, what are their pain points. If you don't have a good understanding of that, a third party cannot help you actually create
Yeah.
these kinds of assets. And they can also like force your employees to go and do their jobs or distribute this stuff. And so I think that's how I would think about outsourcing versus doing it in-house. There's certain things which you can outsource. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be done in-house. In the same way that I see any company which is like, oh yeah, we're gonna just outsource our sales to a third party. It was like, oh, like you really need to understand like how your business operates and why people buy if you want to even try outsourcing like SDRs to third parties. I don't know how a third party person who has no skin in the
Mhm.
game is going to be able to book meetings for you, and usually doesn't end up.
Okay, that makes sense. Given this intersection of social selling and personal branding, what are you finding are perhaps a couple of areas that doesn't get much airtime?
I think a lot of people don't do this or are shy to do this because they have this notion that they keep their personal brand close to their chest. They're like, oh, this is a thing for me. This is not a channel for my
Mhm.
company. First off, if you're in sales and you have a quota, I'm sorry, but you should be doing everything and anything you can do to be hitting that quota. And also, if you don't believe in the product you're selling or company you're working on, I think that's a hard place to be in sales because you like hopefully you're a trustworthy individual who's convincing people that this is the right thing for them to buy. And so you should have no problem talking about it in public if you're talking about it already at conferences and one-on-one on calls and over email. The second thing is I think a lot of people are like, oh, is it going to ruin my brand? Or and what I would say in response to that is A, if you're not posting anything, you don't have a brand in the first place. You just basically do not exist on the internet. So it's net zero. And then B, I think you can only get positive things from this. Your best case scenario is not only do you help the company you work at, and you help yourself by hitting your quota, by building inbound, by getting more pipeline, but you tell the world like, hey, I can come to your company and repeat this. So from an employability perspective, it's actually really good. And I've seen this across a lot of customers, a lot of sales reps, a lot of marketers as well, is they can pivot subject matter pretty quickly. So you can go from one company to the other, take the same skill set, and then pick up like a new customer segment, start connecting with a new type of buyer persona on LinkedIn, start talking about a new type of problem. 2 months in, now you are the expert on this new topic area. You run that for a couple of years, have a lot of success, then rinse and repeat that playbook. Nothing is set in stone. If anything, I think moving forward in the future, as it gets harder and harder to build those kinds of authentic relationships with buyers, seller who can showcase that they have the ability to do them, showcase, do it repeatedly from their hireability perspective.
Very true. I've certainly seen that, observed that myself as well. To wrap things up, Parthi, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
If you're just listening to this one snippet, what I would say is the playbooks of old are the predictable revenue playbook of old is dying. The notion that if I just add additional headcount, if I just send more email, I can book a similar number of meetings for every additional unit of resource I put in. That is gone. Like it's not a linear scale, and so you see diminishing results for every person you hire, which means your CAC is going up, which means at some point like this the math doesn't work out, and so you need to really be thinking about how do I stand out? How do I make my team more efficient? How do I actually connect with my buyers in a world where they are faced with more spam, more volume, and it's getting harder and harder to reach out to them? And I think that's where, in light of everybody using AI to create more spam and more noise, if you can actually use software and AI to enable your sales team to build more authentic relationships, to share their knowledge, to essentially be human, that's going to, and social selling is a great way to do that. I think that's going to be the thing that makes you stand out and going to get you outsized results. And you should really consider doing it, even if it's something that's new and perhaps something you're unfamiliar with, as opposed to, oh yeah, let me hire another SDR and have them send another 100 emails and do 50 calls per day. That is a losing battle.
Brilliant. And if listeners are curious, want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
Best place to find me is on LinkedIn. I am Parthi Loganathan. If that's hard to spell out, it's Parthi, and then maybe search letter drop, and I'll be the top result. You can also email me at parthi@letterdrop.com, and more than happy to answer any questions about go to market, social selling, and thinking about how you might want to implement something like this at your company if you're so curious.
We'll include links to that in the show notes. Parthi, thank you so much for doing this. It's been brilliant.
Thank you for having me.